let's now speak to our SABC correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova, who's joining us from Moscow in Russia. Dasha, good morning and thank you so much for making time for us. So has it been confirmed now with the whereabouts of Prigozhin?
No, we don't know still where Yevgeny Prigozhin is at the moment. The Kremlin has said they are not tracking his location. They have neither the desire nor the capacity to do so. In the meantime, Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, who was the person who managed to broker the deal between the Kremlin and the Wagner boss, has indicated that Prigozhin was no longer in Belarus, but rather in Russia. So all in all, that is raising the questions as to what role Yevgeny Prigozhin could still play. Because if he is in Russia, that means that the Russian authorities have allowed that to take place. And Lukashenko has stressed that Prigozhin is an absolutely free man who is free to make his choices. So that's why we also understand that the Russian authorities are very sure of the unity of the Russian society behind the Russian president, as they have been saying that the Wagner chief has been trying to split the Russian society, but that did not happen. So certainly we are expecting to have some more news with regards to the location of Yevgeny Prigozhin. But in the meantime, we also understand that the fighters of Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner mercenary group have not taken the camps they have been offered to use in Belarus. Instead, as we have heard from Alexander Lukashenko a couple of days ago, they are in their permanent locations, in their permanent camps, which are in the Lugansk People's Republic, where they have been since their pullout from Bakhmut.
Okay. But since that deal that was brokered by President Lukashenko, is there confirmation that indeed at some point Prigozhin was actually in Belarus?
Yes, indeed. We have heard on the 27th of June from Alexander Lukashenko confirming that Prigozhin has been taken to Belarus. He traveled there. And before that, the last time he was seen, he was leaving Rostov-on-Don in a car with his fighters. But now we also understand that the role that Prigozhin and the Wagners will play in the Ukrainian conflict is also unclear, because we keep hearing from the Russian authorities this sort of strategy of distinguishing between the Wagner fighters themselves as well as Yevgeny Prigozhin, saying that the Wagner fighters have proven their efficiency, while Yevgeny Prigozhin has been showing his enormous ambitions, which the Russian authorities insist have led to his uprising. So certainly we understand that Yevgeny Prigozhin was in Belarus. That was part of the deal, that he was supposed to go there. But now we don't know where he is. He could be anywhere on the Russian soil. But again, we are expecting some progress to be made with regards to the Wagner fighters, if they are going to sign contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense, as it has been envisaged by the Russian authorities, to continue their involvement in the ongoing military effort in Ukraine or not. Because Yevgeny Prigozhin himself has been saying that he rejects the idea of his fighters signing contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense, citing the inefficient decision-making within the Russian Ministry of Defense. So certainly that remains to be seen, particularly now that the US has announced that they are planning to send cluster munitions to Ukraine, the decision that has been heavily criticized in Moscow. Moscow insists that the United States is obsessed with defeating Russia, and that's why they simply ignore the fact that those cluster munitions will be detrimental for the civilians in the areas where the operation is proceeding. And also Moscow has been saying that that was also a gesture of despair against the backdrop of the unsuccessful counteroffensive by the Ukrainian armed forces.
Yeah. And with the Wagner mercenaries and those who are part of the group, is it known as yet how many have actually agreed to sign with the Russian military defense force? And also the other part is around what Vladimir Putin had said, that there will be repercussions. Do we know as yet whether anyone will be prosecuted for what happened?
Well, we know that as part of the deal that has been brokered by Alexander Lukashenko, all charges are dropped against the Wagner fighters and against Yevgeny Prigozhin himself, so they will not be prosecuted in one way or another. Moscow has also been suggesting that the Wagner fighters have been misled, that they have been sort of lured into this uprising. And of course, this is again part of that strategy of distinguishing between the Wagner boss and the Wagner fighters themselves. We don't know yet how many fighters have actually signed contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense. We understand there have been some of those, but certainly now we are seeing that all of the billboards that have been posted around the Russian cities calling on the Wagner, calling on Russians to join the Wagner mercenary group, they have been removed. So certainly this is indicative of what is happening. But now we have many billboards rather calling on Russians to join the regular Russian army. So certainly the legislation that has been signed by the Russian president suggested that by the 1st of July, all the units and volunteer detachments that are involved in the ongoing military effort in Ukraine should sign contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense. This has been criticized by Yevgeny Prigozhin, but at the same time, this was also welcomed by, for instance, the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, who said that finally the fighters who are involved in the special military operation, but which are not part of the regular Russian army, they will receive all the benefits that are provided to them by the Russian state. So certainly we don't have those numbers just yet. And as well, we also have heard from Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, saying that the fighters of the Wagner group could have a completely different vision from what they have been offered. And again, the Belarusian authorities have suggested that the camps that have been provided to the Wagner fighters have never been visited or seen by those fighters themselves.
And then the Ukraine President, Volodymyr Zelensky, meeting with his counterpart from Turkey, the President of Turkey. What was discussed there? And I also see some reports indicating that actually what the President of Turkey had said is, this is now Erdogan, that he backs a plan to have Ukraine become a member of NATO.
Well, indeed, we understand that Moscow was closely monitoring the outcomes of the meeting between Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Vladimir Zelensky that was taking place in Turkey. We also know that Moscow has been heavily criticizing the grain deal, which was part of those discussions, as we understand. Moscow has been saying that grain deal should not be extended. At least it will not be extended by the Russian side because the arrangement does not work, and Moscow has not seen any progress when it comes to the lifting of the restrictions from the Russian agricultural exports to the international market. So that's why Moscow has been saying that it will not extend the deal. We all know that that was part of the discussion. Also, the prisoner swap was discussed, as we understand from the media reports in Turkey. And on that, we have seen the reports from the Russian Ministry of Defense that just recently another swap has taken place of over 50 Russian servicemen returning back home. And another issue, of course, which is of paramount importance for Moscow is definitely the very idea of Ukraine joining the NATO military alliance. This has been criticized in Moscow in the first place. Moscow has been insisting that Ukraine should have a neutral status, and this is what Russia was demanding, so that Ukraine is not being pumped up with weapons and takes this neutral position. So certainly all of those outcomes will be closely monitored in Russia, but also very importantly, you have to remember that in Turkey, the Turkish president has said that he will be talking to his Russian counterpart soon. In Moscow, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has confirmed that indeed the contacts could be in preparation, but there's been no concrete date set for those negotiations just yet.
Yeah, and is there confirmation where that meeting between Erdogan as well as President Putin will be taking place? Also considering that, of course, next week you have that NATO alliance summit that will be taking place.
Well, there is no place and no date set for that yet. The Kremlin says the details have never been worked out. No timing, no location have been identified, but Moscow doesn't want to rule out any contacts with international leaders, particularly those that Russia says are important for the Russian Federation.
Thank you so much for your time. That's SABC News correspondent there, joining us from Moscow, Dasha Chernyshova.